I didn't mean to start a fight. That's the first thing I need to say, because people always assume guys who end up bleeding outside bars at 2 in the morning were looking for trouble. I wasn't. Honestly, I'd had a terrible week. My best friend canceled on me last minute, and I should have just gone home after my second drink. Instead, I stayed. The bar was loud in that exhausting way where every laugh sounds too sharp and every conversation feels like it's happening directly inside your skull. Somewhere near the pool tables, two guys were screaming at each other over a game nobody would remember tomorrow. A couple was making out against the jukebox. Someone spilled beer down the back of my jacket and didn't even apologize. I was already irritated before he walked into me. Not bumped. Walked directly into me hard enough to knock my drink against my chest. "Watch where you're going." The guy snapped immediately, even though he'd clearly been the one not paying attention. Normally, I would have let it go, but something in me was already frayed. "You literally walked into me," I said. He laughed like I'd insulted him. His friends laughed too, and that should have been the moment I walked away. Instead, I stayed planted there, jaw tight, exhausted and angry and stupid enough to think I still had the energy for confrontation. The guy stepped closer. "You got a problem?" "No," I replied. "You seem to, though." That did it. Everything after that happened fast and blurry. A shove, someone yelling, a hand grabbing my shoulder. I remember stumbling backward into a table, glasses crashing to the floor. Someone swung first, maybe him, maybe me trying to push him off, and suddenly the entire bar erupted into noise. By the time security dragged us apart, my lip was bleeding and my ribs hurt every time I breathed. "Get him out of here," somebody barked. The cold air outside hit me hard. I remember leaning against the brick wall near the alley beside the bar, trying not to throw up from adrenaline. My knuckles were scraped raw. My head buzzed painfully. Then red and blue lights flashed across the wet pavement. Perfect. A police SUV pulled up near the curb, and two officers stepped out. One older, one younger. The younger one noticed me immediately. Tall, broad shoulders under a dark jacket. Sharp jawline. Calm eyes that somehow looked more tired than annoyed. He walked over slowly. "You hurt?" "I've had better nights," I muttered. That got the faintest reaction out of him. Not exactly a smile. More like he appreciated the honesty. "What's your name?" he asked. "Dominic." "I'm Officer Nathan Keller." Nathan. I don't know why the name stuck in my head immediately, but it did. Behind him, the older cop was talking to security at the bar entrance. Nathan stayed focused on me, flashlight briefly checking the cut near my eyebrow. "You need medical attention?" "No." "You sure?" "Pretty sure." He studied me for another second, like he was deciding whether I was lying. "You been drinking?" "Yeah." "How much?" Enough that getting punched felt personal. That actually made him look away for a second like he was hiding a laugh. "Okay," he said finally. "Sit down before you fall down." "I'm fine." "You're swaying." "I'm standing on uneven pavement." "You're arguing with a cop while bleeding on uneven pavement." I sighed dramatically but slid down onto the curb anyway. For a few minutes, he stayed nearby while the other officers sorted everything out with the bar staff. Apparently nobody wanted to press charges. Drunk idiots fighting outside bars at closing time wasn't exactly rare. Still, my adrenaline was wearing off fast now, leaving behind exhaustion so heavy I could barely hold my eyes open. Nathan crouched slightly in front of me. "You got someone who can pick you up?" I shook my head. "Friend? Family?" "Nope." "You live nearby?" "About 20 minutes." He frowned immediately. "Walking? I don't really have another option." "You're not walking home like this." "I've done worse." That doesn't make it smart. There was something annoyingly calm about him. Not cold, just steady. Like no matter what kind of chaos walked into his shift, he refused to match its energy. The older officer returned then, giving Nathan a look. "We're done here," he said. "Guys free to go." Nathan nodded once, but his eyes stayed on me. "You sure you don't have anyone to call?" I forced out a laugh. At 2:30 in the morning? The only person who'd answer would be my ex, and he'd probably just enjoy hearing I got punched. Nathan stared at me for a second too long after that. Then he said, "I'll drive you." I blinked. "What? You're in no shape to walk home." "I'm not getting arrested, right?" His mouth twitched slightly. "If I were arresting you, I wouldn't have asked. I don't think cops are supposed to do ride shares." Good thing this isn't rideshare. I should have refused. Maybe normal people would have. But my ribs hurt, my head hurt worse, and something about Nathan made saying no feel unnecessarily difficult. So 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a police SUV, trying not to bleed on government property. Outside, rain had started falling lightly across the empty streets. Inside the car, it was strangely quiet. And that was the beginning of everything. The ride to my apartment should have been awkward. I mean, I was sitting bruised and half-drunk in a police SUV next to a guy who looked unfairly good under flashing dashboard lights. There should have been uncomfortable silence. Maybe a lecture. Maybe one of those disappointed authority speeches about making better choices. Instead, Nathan drove with one hand resting loosely near the wheel, completely calm, while rain tapped softly against the windshield. "You fight often?" he asked after a few minutes. I leaned my head back carefully against the seat. "You ask everyone that. Only the bleeding ones." "I'm serious." "So am I." I glanced sideways at him. Up close, he looked older than I first thought. Not old, definitely not, but tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Like he spent most of his life dealing with other people's disasters and rarely talked about his own. "I don't usually fight," I admitted finally. "What happened tonight then?" I shrugged carefully, immediately regretting it when pain shot through my ribs. "Bad week." That enough reason to swing at somebody? He swung first. Nathan gave me a look. That wasn't my question. I stared out the window instead. The city looked strange that late at night. Empty intersections. Neon signs reflected across wet pavement. People drifting between bars looking either ecstatic or miserable with almost nothing in between. I said slowly. I was already angry before he even touched me. Nathan didn't answer immediately. Then, quietly, "That usually helps." Something about the way he said it made me look back at him. Not judgmental. Not mocking. Understanding. Which somehow felt worse. "You a therapist too?" I asked lightly. "No," he replied. "Just observant." I laughed once under my breath. Dangerous quality. Comes with the job. We stopped at a red light downtown. The glow from nearby storefronts lit the inside of the SUV in soft colors for a second before fading again. Nathan glanced over at me. "You live alone?" The question caught me off guard. "Yeah." "You got someone who can check on you tomorrow?" I frowned. "You worried I'll die from wounded pride?" "Mostly worried you might have a concussion." "That's kind of sweet. That's kind of protocol." But the corner of his mouth moved slightly when he said it. I noticed then that Nathan wasn't wearing a wedding ring. Not that it mattered. I mean, obviously it didn't matter. Still, my brain filed the information away immediately like an idiot. "You always this talkative with strangers?" he asked suddenly. "Only the cops driving me home." "You flirt with all law enforcement officers?" I turned toward him so fast I nearly pulled something. "I wasn't flirting." "You call me sweet." "That was observational." "That's what we're calling it." Heat crawled up the back of my neck instantly. "Oh my God," I muttered. "You're enjoying this." "A little." There it was. The first real smile. Not huge. Not dramatic. Just enough to completely change his face. And annoyingly, it made my stomach flip a little. Which was ridiculous considering I looked like I'd just lost a bar fight, because technically I had. Nathan pulled up outside my apartment building about 10 minutes later. I unbuckled slowly, wincing immediately. "Ribs?" he asked. "Pride." "I'll survive." "You sure?" "Probably." He studied me again, eyes lingering briefly on the cut near my eyebrow. Then he reached into the center console, grabbed a small first aid pack, and handed it over. "You keep a first aid kit in your car?" I asked. "Police vehicle." "Right. Forgot you're responsible." "Someone has to be." I smiled despite myself. For a second, neither of us moved. Rain continued tapping softly outside. "You should get ice on your ribs," Nathan said finally. "And if you start feeling dizzy or nauseous, go to urgent care." "Yes, officer." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're enjoying that too much. I don't get pulled over often. Let me have this." That earned another small laugh. Then silence settled again, not awkward exactly, just strangely aware. I realized suddenly that I didn't want to get out of the car yet, which was insane. This man was literally a stranger. A very attractive stranger with calm eyes and nice hands, and a voice that somehow made being told medical instructions sound personal. Dangerous combination. Nathan cleared his throat lightly. "You gonna make it upstairs okay?" "Yeah." "You need help?" "No." "Too fast." One eyebrow lifted slightly. I corrected quickly, "I can walk." "Barely. But technically." "Good recovery." "Thanks." I reached for the door handle, then paused. "This is probably weird to ask," I said carefully, But do cops usually drive random idiots home after fights? Nathan leaned back slightly in his seat. No. Oh, you look like you needed somebody to make sure you got home. The simplicity of the answer hit harder than I expected. Before I could figure out what to say to that, he added quietly, and you didn't seem like an idiot. God, that one sentence did something embarrassingly effective to my chest. I looked away immediately. Well, I muttered, opening the door. Thanks for ruining my plans to dramatically limp home alone. Anytime. Rain hit my face instantly as I stepped onto the sidewalk. I started toward my building entrance, ribs aching with every movement. Halfway there, I glanced back. Nathan was still sitting there watching to make sure I actually got inside. And for some reason, that affected me more than the fight ever had. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Which, honestly, wasn't that far from the truth. Every rib on my left side ached when I breathed too deeply. My eyebrow had dried blood crusted near the cut, and my phone screen was painfully bright against my headache. 11:46 a.m. I groaned immediately. My apartment smelled faintly like frozen pizza and old coffee, and for a few seconds I just lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to remember why my chest felt weird in a way that had nothing to do with bruises. Then I remembered the police SUV. Nathan. Unfortunately, that woke me up faster than caffeine. I rolled onto my side carefully and instantly regretted it. Jesus Christ, I muttered into my pillow. Eventually, I dragged myself out of bed and shuffled toward the kitchen, looking genuinely tragic. My reflection in the microwave confirmed it. Split lip, bruised jaw, purple shadow forming along my ribs. Amazing. I opened the freezer for ice and nearly dropped the tray when my phone buzzed suddenly against the counter. Unknown number. For one stupid second, my heart jumped, which made absolutely no sense. Still, I answered. Hello. Dominic. Nathan's voice. Immediately calm. Low. Familiar already in a way it shouldn't have been. And somehow that was worse than if I'd imagined him entirely. I leaned heavily against the counter. You're either checking if I survived or calling to arrest me retroactively. A quiet exhale, almost a laugh. You sound rough. You should see me. There was a small pause. I did see you, he replied. Okay. That did not help my situation at all. How'd you get my number? I asked. Incident report. That feels mildly illegal. It's not. That's disappointing. Another tiny laugh. I realized suddenly Nathan almost never laughed fully. Mostly, he just let amusement slip out in pieces like he wasn't used to relaxing enough for more than that. You dizzy? He asked. A little. Nauseous? No. Headache? Yes. Drink water. You always this bossy off-duty too. I'm not off-duty. I blinked. You call me from work? You hit your head. You checked on me. The words came out quieter than I meant them to. Silence settled briefly on the line. Then Nathan said, more carefully this time, you live alone. Just wanted to make sure somebody talked to you today. Something in my chest tightened unexpectedly. It had been a while since someone checked on me without obligation attached to it. No guilt. No expectation. No hidden reason. Just concern. I tried to cover the feeling immediately with humor. Well, now I feel emotionally monitored. You probably should be. That bad. You picked a fight with 3 guys. There were only 2. You remember the details. That's good. Oh my God, I groaned. You really are doing concussion tests on me. You complaining means you're functioning normally. I smiled despite myself. Dangerous. Very dangerous. So what happens now? I asked lightly. You call me every morning to evaluate my poor life choices. Depends. You planning more bar fights? Only if you keep rescuing me afterward. That one slipped out before I could stop it. Immediate silence. I closed my eyes. Great. Fantastic. Time to evaporate permanently. Then Nathan spoke again, slower now. You flirting with me again, Dominic? Heat crawled instantly into my face. I think technically you started it. That sounds like something someone says right before another bad decision. Who says it'll be bad? The second the words left my mouth, my stomach flipped hard. Too much. Way too much. But Nathan didn't shut it down. If anything, the silence afterward felt heavier. I should let you rest, he said finally. Which was absolutely not the response I wanted for some reason. Right, I replied quickly. Yeah, probably. Another pause. Then, you eat yet? I frowned. What? Have you eaten? No. You should. You really commit to the caretaker thing, huh? It's easier than paperwork. I laughed softly. And there it was again, that strange warmth beneath, all the teasing. Like Nathan was trying very carefully not to cross some invisible line, which naturally made me want to cross it immediately. You always call civilians the next day? I asked. No, just the pretty ones. That time he actually laughed under his breath, low and surprised like he didn't mean to. Take care of yourself, Dominic. There was something about the way he said my name. Steady, intentional, like he was trying not to say something else. You too, Nathan. The line stayed quiet for half a second longer before disconnecting. I stared at my phone afterward like an idiot, then at the ice melting across my counter, then back at my phone, because suddenly my terrible week didn't feel quite as terrible anymore. And that was probably the first real problem. For the next 3 days, Nathan stayed annoyingly present in my life. Not constantly, not in some over-the-top way, just enough to become a problem. First, there was another phone call that evening, then a text the next morning. Drink water today. No hello, no signature, just that. I stared at the message while standing half awake in my kitchen, then replied before I could think better of it. Bossy. His response came 2 minutes later. Alive? I smiled immediately, which was deeply embarrassing. Barely. Good enough. That should have been the end of it. Instead, somehow, we kept talking. Short conversations at first. Random check-ins. Nathan asking if my ribs still hurt. Me accusing him of enjoying medical authority too much. Him pretending not to appreciate my flirting while very obviously appreciating it. And somewhere between Wednesday night and Thursday afternoon, I realized something dangerous. I looked forward to hearing from him, which made absolutely no sense. We barely knew each other. Technically, our relationship was built entirely on poor decisions and minor bodily injury. Still, Nathan had this way of talking that made everything feel calmer once he entered the conversation. Even silence with him felt deliberate instead of awkward. Thursday evening, I was sitting on my couch trying unsuccessfully to work when my phone buzzed again. Nathan, you behaving? I snorted softly. Depends who's asking. A cop. Damn. Then probably not. 3 dots appeared immediately. You heal fast. You should see my emotional damage. That took longer to answer. Then, you joke a lot when you're uncomfortable. I stared at the screen. Because unfortunately, he wasn't wrong. I typed 3 different responses before settling on. Occupational hazard. What occupation? Avoiding vulnerability professionally. That finally earned me. Sounds exhausting. The simplicity of it hit harder than expected, because it was exhausting sometimes. Always being funny first. Careless first. Easy first. Safer that way. Before I could overthink it, another message appeared. You busy tonight? My stomach flipped instantly. Probably not. Good. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. Just good. I frowned at the screen for a solid 30 seconds before finally typing. That sounded threatening. Nathan replied almost immediately. Can I call you? I sat up straighter without meaning to. Yeah. His voice came through a second later, low and familiar enough now to immediately affect me. Hey. Hey yourself. You sound better. You sound disappointed. Little bit. I smiled automatically. There was background noise on his end. Traffic maybe. A car door shutting somewhere nearby. You working? I asked. Just finished. You calling me from another dramatic police vehicle? Actually, he said slowly. I was wondering if you wanted dinner. Silence. Real, actual silence. My brain completely stalled out. You're asking me out? I said finally. Nathan exhaled softly like he'd been expecting resistance. I'm asking if you want food. With you? Yes. That sounds suspiciously like a date. Does that bother you? No, I answered too quickly. Then slower. No, it doesn't. Something shifted quietly in his voice after that. Softer maybe. There's a diner near downtown, he said. Nothing fancy. You taking all your injured civilians there? Only the difficult ones. Good. I was worried I wasn't special. That earned one of those quiet laughs again. God, I like that sound way too much. An hour later, I was standing outside the diner, trying not to look like I'd put effort into my appearance, which unfortunately I absolutely had. The bruising on my face had darkened slightly, making me look like I participated in underground boxing for rent money. I'd changed shirts 3 times anyway. Pathetic behavior. Nathan pulled into the parking lot a minute later, climbing out of his truck instead of the police SUV this time. And somehow that changed everything. Without the uniform fully visible, he looked less untouchable. Dark hoodie, jeans, tired eyes, strong hands shoved into his pockets against the cold. Just Nathan, not Officer Keller. which honestly made him more attractive, not less. Dangerous development. He noticed me watching immediately. What? He asked. You're unfairly good looking for someone who lectures me about hydration. Nathan actually looked caught off guard by that. Then he shook his head once, smiling slightly. You always say exactly what you're thinking. Absolutely not. You'd be terrified. I'm starting to doubt that. We walked inside together, warmth hitting us immediately. The diner was mostly empty at that hour. Old booths. Soft music playing somewhere overhead. The smell of coffee and fries lingering in the air. Nathan slid into the booth across from me, studying my face briefly. How bad are the ribs? Manageable. You resting? Emotionally? Never. That wasn't my question. I know. He gave me a look that somehow felt fond already, which should have alarmed me more than it did. A waitress came over for drink orders, and for a few minutes conversation stayed easy. Simple. But underneath it, I could feel something building. Awareness. The kind that changes the air between two people without permission. At one point Nathan leaned back slightly, eyes on me. So, he said quietly, you always flirt this much when someone checks on you? I held his gaze. No, I admitted. That changed something immediately. His expression softened almost invisibly after that. And for the first time since meeting him outside that bar, I got the feeling Nathan was trying just as hard not to cross a line as I was. Dinner with Nathan should have felt awkward after the flirting. Instead, it felt dangerously easy. That was the problem. Not tension, although there was definitely tension. Not attraction, that part was painfully obvious by now. It was the comfort. The way conversation slid naturally from teasing into real things without either of us forcing it. At some point, we stopped joking long enough for me to realize Nathan had one of those voices that made people confess things accidentally. So, I said, stirring my drink absent-mindedly, how long have you been a cop? For years. You always wanted to do that. Nathan shrugged slightly. Not always. What changed? My dad was a firefighter, he said. Whole family did emergency services stuff. Kind of grew up around it. You like it? That took longer to answer. Sometimes. Honest answer. I like that about him too. No performance. No fake certainty. Just honest. Nathan glanced at me over his coffee cup. What about you? What about me? What do you actually do when you're not getting into fights? I smiled faintly. Graphic design. That explains the dramatic jackets. Excuse you. That jacket was stylish. It had chains on it. They were tasteful chains. Nathan laughed quietly into his coffee again. God, that sound was becoming a genuine issue for me. What? I asked. You don't seem like somebody who scares easily. The comment caught me off guard slightly. I'm literally bruised because I made a terrible decision. That's not fear, Nathan replied calmly. That's impulse. I stared at him for a second. You analyze everybody like this? Only people who interest me. There it was again. That line between teasing and something else. And neither of us seemed willing to step back from it anymore. I looked down briefly at my fries, mostly so Nathan wouldn't notice the effect that sentence had on me. Unfortunately, he noticed anyway. You blush fast, he said softly. Oh, I hate you. No, you don't. The confidence in his voice sent heat straight through my chest. I changed the subject immediately before I embarrassed myself further. You always this calm. Nathan leaned back slightly in the booth. Mostly. That's terrifying. Why? Because I feel like if a building exploded behind you, you just blink once and keep drinking coffee. That's dramatic. You're avoiding the question. His mouth twitched slightly. Then he admitted quietly, somebody has to stay calm. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Like maybe that sentence applied to a lot more than work. Before I could ask anything else, the waitress dropped off our food. Nathan thanked her, automatically polite in that effortless way some people are without realizing it. I noticed things about him constantly now. The way he listened fully when I spoke. The way he rarely interrupted. How careful he was with space, with attention, with people. None of it matched the image I'd built in my head of cops being loud or arrogant or impossible to read. Nathan felt steady. And honestly, steady was probably more dangerous to me than charming. About halfway through dinner, Nathan glanced toward my ribs when I shifted slightly. You're still hurting. Observant. You keep leaning to one side. Maybe it's part of my personality now. Dominic. The way he said my name low and mildly warning made my stomach flip immediately. I hated how much I liked it. I'm okay, I said softer this time. Nathan held my gaze for another second before nodding once. Good. Silence settled after that. Not uncomfortable, just aware. The diner around us buzzed quietly with late-night conversations and clinking dishes, but our booth suddenly felt smaller somehow. More private. Nathan traced one finger slowly against the side of his coffee mug before speaking again. You know, he said carefully, most people would have stopped answering my texts by now. I smiled faintly. Most people probably don't flirt with the cop who picked them up bleeding outside a bar. You saying that's the only reason you answered? No. The honesty slipped out before I could soften it. Nathan noticed immediately. His eyes lifted to mine slowly. Why then? There it was. The real question. And suddenly I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with bruises. Because the truthful answer was dangerous. I answered anyway. Because you called. Nathan didn't move for a second. Then his expression changed, subtly softer around the edges somehow. Like that answer mattered more than he expected. You really don't know what you do to people, do you? He said quietly. My heartbeat stuttered hard. That sounds illegal coming from a police officer. That finally broke the tension enough for him to laugh again, shaking his head slightly. But something had shifted now. The flirting didn't feel accidental anymore. Neither did the eye contact, or the pauses, or the way Nathan kept looking at my mouth before catching himself. When we finally left the diner, cold air hit us instantly outside. Rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened under streetlights. Nathan walked beside me toward his truck slowly. You cold? He asked. No. You're shivering. I'm delicate. You're impossible. Yet here you are. Nathan looked at me then. Really looked. And for one dangerous second, neither of us moved. The city noise felt far away suddenly. My pulse climbed immediately because there was something in his expression now that definitely hadn't been there outside the bar that first night. Wanting. Careful wanting. But still. Then Nathan blinked once and stepped back slightly, like he'd caught himself crossing an invisible line internally. You should get home, he said quietly. Right. Of course. I nodded once, trying not to look disappointed. Yeah. Nathan opened the truck door for me anyway. And somehow that tiny gesture affected me more than all the flirting combined. Nathan drove me home again after dinner. Not because I needed him to. At least, that's what I kept telling myself while sitting in the passenger seat of his truck, trying not to notice how good his hands looked on the steering wheel. Outside, the city had quieted down into that late-night stillness where everything feels softer around the edges. Streetlights reflected across wet roads. Music played quietly through the speakers low enough that neither of us felt pressured to fill silence constantly. It should have been awkward after the almost moment outside the diner. Instead, the tension had somehow deepened into something warmer. More dangerous. You're quieter tonight, Nathan said eventually. I'm processing. That sounds threatening. It should. He smiled slightly without looking away from the road. I leaned my head back carefully against the seat. You know what's unfair? What? You being emotionally intelligent. Nathan actually laughed softly at that. That's your complaint? Yes. I expected authority issues and unresolved trauma. Not whatever this is. Whatever this is. I turned toward him slightly. You know exactly what this is. Nathan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. That tiny reaction sent heat straight through me. Interesting. You flirt like you're trying to start a fire, he muttered. And you act like you don't enjoy it. I didn't say that. The honesty of that answer hit hard enough that I looked away immediately toward the window, because suddenly the inside of the truck felt very small. Nathan slowed at a red light downtown, fingers tapping once lightly against the steering wheel, then quieter. You make me forget to be careful sometimes. My heartbeat stumbled so hard it actually annoyed me. I tried to recover with humor immediately. That sounds incredibly irresponsible for law enforcement. Nathan glanced over finally. His eyes held mine for one long second. That's the problem. Neither of us spoke after that. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was suddenly too much. By the time we reached my apartment building, my chest felt painfully tight in a way that had nothing to do with bruised ribs. Nathan parked near the curb, but didn't unlock the doors immediately. I noticed that right away. You planning to kidnap me? I asked softly. That would be bad for my career. But not impossible. Dominic. The warning in his voice made my stomach flip instantly again. God, I needed him to stop saying my name like that. Or maybe never stop. Equally dangerous options. Nathan finally exhaled slowly, leaning back slightly in his seat. I should probably say this now before things get more complicated. There it was. The shift. My pulse climbed immediately. Okay, I said carefully. Nathan kept his eyes forward for a second before looking at me. When I picked you up that night, he said slowly, I wasn't trying to flirt with you. I smiled faintly. Good to know I hallucinated all this naturally. That earned the smallest shake of his head. I'm serious. Something about his tone made me sit up straighter. Nathan continued quietly. I thought you were attractive immediately, but I wasn't planning on this. This? His eyes flicked briefly toward me again, wanting to see you. And there it was. Simple, honest, completely devastating to my nervous system. For a second, I genuinely forgot how to speak. Nathan looked almost frustrated with himself now. You don't make this easy, he admitted. Easy to resist? Yes. The honesty between us suddenly felt sharp enough to cut through the entire truck. I swallowed hard. Nathan, you flirt constantly, he continued quietly. But half the time I can't tell if you mean it or if you're hiding behind it. That one landed directly in my chest. Because unfortunately, he was right again. I looked down briefly at my hands, then answered honestly. I mean it with you. Silence. Heavy and immediate. Nathan stared at me for a long second like he was recalculating something internally. Then very softly. Yeah, he said. I know. The air between us changed completely after that. No teasing now. No pretending. Just two people suddenly aware of exactly what was happening. My pulse was loud enough I was sure he could hear it. Nathan's hand shifted slightly against the center console between us. Closer now, but not touching. Still careful. Always careful. You know what the worst part is? I asked quietly. What? I should probably have more self-preservation instincts than this. Nathan's eyes dropped briefly to my mouth before returning to my eyes. You probably should. Neither of us moved. The truck felt unbearably warm suddenly. Then Nathan leaned back first, like physically forcing himself to create distance again. Your ribs need more time before I decide you're capable of good decisions, he muttered. I laughed softly out of pure nervous energy. Oh my God. You're actually stopping yourself because I'm injured. You got into a fight with 3 drunk guys. 2. You keep changing the number. That feels unrelated. Nathan smiled despite himself. Then quieter. Come here. My heart nearly stopped. What? You heard me. And because apparently I'd lost all survival instincts completely, I leaned closer immediately. Nathan's hand came up slowly, careful enough that I could have pulled away easily. Instead, his fingers brushed lightly near the cut by my eyebrow. Barely touching. Just checking it. But the softness of it hit me harder than a kiss would have. You're healing, he murmured. Neither of us moved after that. His hand lingered briefly near my face before falling away slowly. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. Nathan wasn't careful because he felt less. He was careful because he felt too much. After that night in Nathan's truck, everything changed. Not dramatically. Worse. Subtly. Because now there was no pretending anymore. No hiding behind jokes about cops or bad decisions or accidental flirting. We'd crossed into something real enough that every interaction suddenly carried weight. And apparently neither of us knew what to do with that. The next morning, I woke up to a text. You alive? I smiled immediately into my pillow like a complete idiot. Barely. Emotionally unstable though. Nathan replied almost instantly. That's not new. Rude. Accurate. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then, you working today? Yeah. You? Trying. Mostly thinking about poor choices. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Nathan, same. That one sentence ruined my ability to focus for the next 4 hours. By Friday evening, my ribs hurt less. My bruising had faded enough that strangers no longer looked mildly alarmed when I entered stores, and Nathan had somehow become part of my daily routine. Morning texts, late-night calls, random conversations about absolutely nothing. It felt dangerously domestic already, which should have scared me more than it did. That night, I was halfway through making pasta when my phone rang. Nathan. Hey, I answered. You busy? Depends. With what? Considering whether emotional attachment is a medical emergency. A quiet laugh came through the phone. I can come back later if you're spiraling. You imply I ever stop. There was background noise on his end again. Traffic. Maybe. Then a car door shutting. You eat yet? He asked. Currently cooking. Dangerous. You really underestimate me. I saw you concussed trying to argue with pavement. That feels unrelated to pasta. Nathan hummed softly like he was smiling. Then, I'm outside. I blinked hard. What? You're building. My stomach flipped instantly. You just casually forgot to mention that. You sounded lonely. The simplicity of the answer hit harder than expected. I walked to the window immediately and looked down toward the street. Nathan stood beside his truck under the glow of a street lamp, hands in his jacket pockets, looking up toward my building like he wasn't completely rearranging my nervous system just by existing there. "God, you can come up," I said quietly. Another pause. "You sure?" "Yes." 10 minutes later, Nathan stood inside my apartment for the first time. And suddenly, everything felt different again. More personal somehow. He looked around slowly while shrugging off his jacket. "This feels weird," he admitted. "You've seen me bleeding in a police vehicle, but my apartment is the intimate milestone." "Yes." I laughed softly. Nathan's eyes moved around the room, carefully bookshelves, records near the TV, half-finished coffee on the counter. Then back to me. "This feels more real." The honesty in his voice made my chest tighten immediately. I looked away first. "Pasta's almost done," I muttered. Nathan followed me into the kitchen, leaning casually against the counter while I stirred noodles that suddenly felt impossible to focus on correctly. "You nervous?" he asked quietly. "No. You almost dropped the spoon." "I'm expressive." "You're flustered." "That's your fault." Nathan smiled slightly at that. Then silence settled between us again. But this silence felt different from before. Closer. The kind that happens when two people are both aware something important is building underneath ordinary moments. At one point, I turned slightly and nearly walked directly into him. Nathan had stepped closer without me noticing. Not touching. Just there. Too close for my heartbeat to stay normal. "Sorry," I said automatically. Nathan looked down at me calmly. "You apologize a lot when you're affected." I stared at him. "You notice everything. It's deeply unsettling." Occupational hazard. That stopped being attractive for me days ago. Nathan's mouth twitched slightly. "Liar." "Probably." The pasta boiled over a second later because apparently my body had abandoned all useful functions around this man. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, grabbing the pot quickly. Nathan laughed quietly behind me. "You okay there?" "No. You're distracting." "Good." I turned toward him too fast. "You admitted that way too confidently." Nathan leaned back lightly against the counter again, arms crossed now. "Dominic." The way he said my name this time felt softer than before. Not warning. Not teasing. Just warm. Dangerous, dangerous warmth. "You have any idea," he said quietly, "how hard it's been not to kiss you yet?" Every thought in my head disappeared instantly. Completely gone. I stared at him like my brain had short-circuited. Nathan looked almost surprised he'd admitted it out loud too. But he didn't take it back. And suddenly the apartment felt very small again. Very quiet. I swallowed hard. "Nathan, you don't have to answer that." "But what if I want to?" His eyes darkened immediately. That reaction alone nearly destroyed me. Nathan stepped closer slowly this time, enough that I could feel warmth between us now. Enough that neither of us could pretend this wasn't happening anymore. Still careful. Still giving me space. But wanting me anyway. "I'm trying to do this right," he admitted softly. The vulnerability in that sentence hit me harder than anything else had. Because Nathan wasn't scared of attraction. He was scared of hurting me, rushing me, mishandling something real. And somehow that made me want him even more. I looked up at him carefully. "You know," I whispered, "for somebody so calm, you make me incredibly nervous." Nathan's hand lifted slowly toward my face again, fingers brushing lightly near my jaw this time. "You make me nervous too." And that was the exact moment I realized I was already in trouble. Nathan kissed me for the first time 3 minutes after admitting he'd been trying not to. Not immediately. That would have been easier. Instead, we stood there in my kitchen with too much awareness between us, his hand still resting lightly against my jaw while pasta water hissed forgotten on the stove behind me. "You're thinking too hard again," Nathan murmured. "I always think too hard." I noticed. His thumb brushed once near my jawline soft enough that my pulse jumped embarrassingly fast. I looked up at him carefully. "You're very calm for someone currently ruining my entire emotional stability." Nathan smiled slightly. "You were emotionally unstable before me." "True. But now it feels personal." That quiet laugh again. God. Then silence settled between us one last time. The kind that asks a question without words. Nathan's eyes searched mine carefully like he was still giving me a chance to stop this if I wanted. I didn't. Not even a little. So when he leaned down slowly, I met him halfway. The kiss was soft, careful, and somehow that made it infinitely worse for my nervous system. Nathan kissed like he approached everything else steady, attentive, intentional. No rushing. No performance. Just warmth and patience and the terrifying feeling that he was paying complete attention to me. My hand caught lightly against the front of his hoodie without me meaning to. Nathan's breath shifted immediately at that. Then he pulled back just slightly, forehead resting briefly against mine. "You okay?" he asked quietly. The fact that he asked nearly destroyed me on the spot. "Yeah," I whispered. "You?" Nathan exhaled softly like he'd been holding his breath for days. "No idea." I laughed under mine, nervous energy spilling out instantly. "That makes two of us." His hand slid carefully from my jaw down along my neck before falling away completely. Even that tiny loss of contact felt noticeable immediately. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Behind us, the pasta water boiled over again aggressively. Nathan blinked once, then looked toward the stove. "You're really bad at multitasking around me." "Oh my God," I groaned, turning quickly toward the mess. "This is humiliating." Nathan laughed quietly while grabbing a towel from the counter beside me. And somehow that was the moment that got me most. Not the kiss, not the tension. The domestic normalness of him standing beside me cleaning up spilled water like this wasn't the most intense thing happening in my life right now. "You do realize," I said carefully while fixing the burner, "this technically counts as emotional manipulation." Nathan handed me the towel calmly. "How?" "You kissed me, and now you're helping with kitchen cleanup. Very unfair combination. I'm a public servant." "That's not what that means." Nathan smiled again, softer this time. Then his expression shifted slightly as his eyes moved over my face. "You still hurting?" he asked quietly. The question caught me off guard after everything else. "My ribs." "Yes. A little." Nathan nodded once slowly, gaze lingering near the fading bruise along my jaw. "I didn't like seeing you hurt." Simple sentence. Completely devastating effect. I looked away first this time because suddenly my chest felt too tight again. "Nathan." "I mean it," he said softly. The kitchen suddenly felt too small for conversations this honest. I forced myself to focus on draining pasta before I accidentally said something reckless like "stay forever," which honestly wasn't far from where my brain already was. We ate on my couch afterward with a random sitcom playing quietly in the background neither of us really watched. At some point, Nathan stretched one arm along the back of the couch behind me naturally, like he'd done it 100 times before. And weirdly, that affected me almost more than the kiss had. Because it felt comfortable. Easy. Like my apartment had quietly made space for him already. "You're staring again," Nathan said without looking away from the TV. "I'm observing." "You're thinking loudly." That's rich coming from somebody who psychoanalyzes me recreationally. Nathan finally turned his head slightly toward me. "You want honesty?" "That depends. I've wanted to come upstairs since the second night I drove you home." My heartbeat immediately lost all structural integrity again. "You hide it well." "No," he replied calmly. "You just distract people when you're nervous." I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped. Because unfortunately he was right again. Nathan noticed immediately. "That face means I won. You're deeply annoying. You like me." I smiled despite myself. "Yeah, that's becoming a real issue." Something softened visibly in his expression after that. Not triumph. Not smugness. Just warmth. Real warmth. The kind that sneaks up on you slowly before suddenly becoming dangerous. Outside, rain started tapping lightly against the windows again. Inside, Nathan sat close enough that I could feel warmth from his shoulder beside mine. And somewhere between shared pasta, soft conversation, and the steady sound of rain outside, I realized something terrifying. The fight at the bar already felt insignificant now, like it had only existed to lead me here. To Nathan, to this couch, to the way he looked at me like he was trying very hard not to want me too much and failing anyway. And honestly, I was failing too.